coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. This week, we're going back to talking about the guys on the show once again. A few months ago, we debated which guys, if any, were right for our Gilmore girls. But this time we're going the opposite direction and talking about all of the bad boyfriends. And we use that term loosely because we're not talking about boyfriends who are bad from a personality perspective or who are bad people in any way, but we're just focusing on the boyfriends for both of our Gilmore women who weren't quite right, the ones that maybe perhaps didn't get enough screen time or that we never saw enough of in terms of episode time, but also the ones who were admittedly at the end of the day just total jerks.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. But as usual, this is your regular reminder. This is a spoilers all podcast. If you don't want to know what happens with these guys, you might want to bow out now, go finish the show, come back. We'll still be here. We want you to watch this episode, but like only when you're comfortable. And if you do all those likey, subscribey, YouTubey things, comment down below, share with your friends. We would be ever so grateful. So Laura, why don't you give us our first synopsis?
I will do just that. We kick things off this week with episode 11 of season 3, I Solemnly Swear. Lorelai and Suki take a course about running an inn at the Learning Center, where Suki reunites with an old coworker, Joe, who reveals he used to like her and mistakes their plans for a meal for an actual date, even though Suki just got married, and therefore she has to break it to him gently. Lorelai hits it off with Joe's friend Alex, who calls her to set up a date. Francie manipulates Rory to make her look bad to Paris, and Paris feels betrayed because she lets the cat out of the bag about her new boyfriend.
Season 3, episode 12 is Lorelai Out of Water. After a lovely coffee date with Alex, he invites her to go fishing with him. So Luke teaches her to fish in her front yard in a little pool, and it's the cutest. Zach hits on Lorelai. Yuck. Luke meets Taylor's lawyer, and a spark flies, so he asks her out. Rory attends the arranged Korean wedding of one of Lane's cousins, and Lane plots to have her mother fall in love with Dave so that she can ask if Dave can take her to prom. And Mrs. Kim says, maybe, but pulls a bait and switch by setting her up with young Chu. And Paris tries to have Rory impeached for espionage and treason at the student government meeting, and their bickering lands them in Charleston's office. So, yeah, this is going to be a good one. As I was thinking of people for this episode, people we could talk about, and making the list, I was like, most of these guys are just sweet, normal guys. But that kind of makes them boring for TV. And it makes me a little bit salty that the Gilmore women have to end up with uncommunicative, immature, volatile guys for us to give a crap.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you're going to get your viewers every single week. So I get it from the television perspective and needing the numbers, but you are right. And we say we're talking about bad boyfriends, but we're not talking about people who it's just jerk number 1, jerk number 2, jerk number 3. We're talking about people who, I mean, some of them were not great, and we'll get to those individuals, but we're talking about bad boyfriends in the greater context of we just didn't see enough of you before the relationship ended. We wish we could have gotten more in some cases, or even just individuals who were there, but just it didn't work out. I mean, I'm thinking of Young Chu specifically. So the bad boyfriend umbrella is terminology that is used loosely here this week.
Yeah, we don't necessarily also mean that they could never have worked out with our Gilmore girls. There's for some of them, it really was an element of just not enough time devoted to this to bear out a satisfying narrative. And there are a number of reasons for that. Most of them more meta. We'll jump into it a little more deeply in a second, but Alex, he got tapped to do something else and just never showed back up. So we'll get there. But speaking of Alex, why don't we get started with Lorelai's guys and talk about how we feel about Alex, because actually he seems to be quite well loved by the fandom, and most people were sad that we didn't get enough of him. Do you agree with that? Do you like Alex for Lorelai?
I do, actually. I like him better than I certainly like him better than Jason Digger. I even like him better than Christopher. What'd you say?
I said, get out of here.
Yeah, okay. We can fight
I
about
love
this
Digger.
too. That's fine. That's fine. I don't not like Jason. I'm just saying that I think Alex was, I think he was a really good fit for Lorelai. And I think that had he stuck around, he would have been a really good partner for her, even more so than Jason, than Christopher, perhaps even Luke. And obviously the Luke Lorelai chemistry is something that is shown to us from the pilot, so that's going to always be very hard for us to overlook. But Alex was a really sweet guy. Right off the bat, like a coffee lover, which is going to just have Lorelai be like, being like, mm-hmm. I love their date at the coffee house, just doing samples of the different brews together, and him just taking note of her recommendations. Like, I thought that was like a really sweet and unique date. It's different from your normal, going to the movies or going out to a restaurant for dinner, which is fine, but I liked that creativity aspect of that date. And I think it allowed for them to just better converse and get to know each other. Granted, it ended in Lorelai accepting another date to go fishing because she wasn't transparent about what her interests actually are and where they lie. But again, I just thought it was like a sweet moment. He was very forthcoming about his children, and not hiding them like Luke did with April. And you could tell he's trying to, like, or at least what I got was that he's trying to be a good father. He's playing an active role in his kids' lives, even though he's not with their mother anymore. He takes an interest in wanting to know about Rory and about Lorelai's daughter. So I think if we had gotten more of him, I think that relationship would have blossomed. And I think it could have been something that would have maybe not gone the whole way or gone the distance, but I feel like they were never a one and done sort of couple in terms of like, no, we're just gonna, we had one or two dates and we're gonna go separate ways. I think they had a lot in common that they could have made that work for some time, if not, again, the whole 9 yards. But what do you think?
I think he's an interesting one because the first thing we really get to know about his interests is the fact that he likes to fish and camp, which are just really not things Lorelai likes to do. And she even says this to Suki. She's like, I'm not a 16-year-old girl who needs to lie to make a boy like me. So, like, I don't know why I agreed to this. I don't know why I said that. But, it was clear that she was just sort of, she liked him. She felt not pressure necessarily, but she wanted to show some enthusiasm for his interests, and she'll do anything if she gets to buy an outfit. So it's cute. And like Luke likes the same things, but Lorelai and Luke have known each other for so long that Luke knows not to expect Lorelai to partake in those things with him, at least. So I find it interesting that they don't give us much else other than his job and the fact that he's starting a coffee shop with Joe. So he could have used a little more personality, but he does have good banter with Lorelai. I really like when they're on their coffee date, and she's like, so like all these samples are free, and he's like, yeah, but if I like them, I have to stock my coffee shop from this warehouse. So really, the state's costing me $11,000.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's funny. He's a funny guy, and he's very sweet. You can tell he's a devoted dad, which is nice. But that begs the question: how do you think Lorelai would have fared as a stepmom to two kids who are like 6 and 9?
I think she would have done well with it. There obviously would have been an adjustment period because you're taking on a guardianship role with kids that you haven't known at all up until that point. So obviously there's always the question of, are these kids going to respect you? Are they going to adhere to the guidelines that you lay out? Or is Lorelai going to like them and have a good rapport with them? We don't know. It could really go either way, and we don't have an answer because it's not something that we ever saw. But I feel like it would have gone well. Again, I say that loosely because we didn't see it, but I have to believe that Alex seems like he's probably raising good kids. there's no indication that they're troubling, perhaps in the same way that someone like Jess is. And granted, this is a 6 and a 9-year-old, so it might even be too early for that. But I feel like Lorelai would have handled it well and would have stepped into that role well, because she's not the type of person that is going to. She obviously loves kids. She has one of her own. I don't think she's going to be dismissive of them, or just, be the evil stepmother and, no, like, Alex is mine, and, get rid of the children. I think she would have factored it all in well. And I think she would have done well as a stepmother, even if there's not that immediate, connection in terms of genuine love and care and affection. That's something that takes time, but I feel like she would have grown into it, and she would have put in the work to invest in those kids' lives, because she cares about Alex, and that's a direct part of his life too. So I think she would have done well with it.
I tend to agree, because we do see how she interacts with April and with Gigi, and we know that she is great with them, and she wants to be a positive part of their lives. But those girls are the daughters of men that she's loved for a long time. Gigi is Christopher's daughter, and she's known Christopher for 30 years, and she was there for the birth of Gigi. Like, this, it feels like a very different thing. And with Luke, April's already kind of a preteen, and Anna's not really in the picture as it pertains to Luke's love life. And so to bring in a new guy who has 2 kids, young kids, like just as Lorelai's about to get rid of Rory off to college, it's a little different, I think, than having these, like, either a newborn who's like really young, or having a preteen, and having these sort of established relationships with those guys. Whereas this is a new guy, and Lord knows what the situation is like with his ex. It could be very messy. Especially, I don't know, like, Lorelai and Anna even have their troubles, and Anna's not even a love interest for Luke. So she's not competition per se. So that would have been an interesting dynamic. But I mean, other than the obvious Luke of it all, and the fact that they were telegraphed from the pilot to be endgame, the other thing that makes me think that Alex wasn't going to be the one to go the distance, despite the fact that they seem to hit it off really well and, like, have good chemistry and good dates, is the fact that, like, can you see him and his 2 kids moving into Lorelai's house in Stars Hollow? Or can you see her moving to his house and giving up everything there?
I could not see them moving into Lorelai's house.
Where would you put them?
Yeah, it's just, there's no space. I mean, she has to, like, if Lorelai wants a man in her bed, she can have one, but there's no third bedroom. It's just, there's one bedroom for Lorelai, there's one bedroom for Rory. So even if Alex were to be upstairs, it's like, again, where are you going to put those 2 other kids? Unless you do some home renovations and make the house larger, those kids are sleeping on the couch or on sleeping bags on the floor. And I also feel like, even though Rory is at the tail end of her high school career and about to leave for college anyway, I feel like she would just feel largely uncomfortable, and even feel perhaps like she doesn't have a place within her own home anymore. And that's not something that I would want her to have to feel or go through. So no, I don't see a way, again, unless you made the house larger through renovations, that would work. But we've talked about this before too, how we don't see Lorelai ever leaving Stars Hollow. It's just such a built-in and ingrained part of her at this point that I feel like she does need a man who is going to fit into her world and be a part of that town and that community. And she's never going to want to leave or go elsewhere. We've talked about it before, and I stand by it. It's one thing to, like, spend a night, or, to do a trial move-in, but I feel like at the end of the day, she would always be brought back to Stars Hollow. So unless Alex is going to fit into her world there, I don't see her leaving.
I agree. I think he's a good dude who had some promise and had good chemistry with Lorelai. But ultimately, I think she had more chemistry even with Max. I thought that their relationship was more passionate and more fun to watch. As many issues as we have with Max, I don't know. He was more fun. But why don't we move on to Peyton? Initial thoughts. What do we think of Peyton Sanders? What do we think of that whole kerfuffle?
Hard pass. Oh gosh. I mean, I feel like he's just a man who is written in to be fluff and filler, and not someone who is ever going to stick around more. And perhaps even someone who's just written in to allow Lorelai to just very quickly realize, no, that's not what I want, and therefore do some quick introspection into what she actually is looking for in a guy. I feel like sometimes from a writing perspective, that's all these characters are meant to be. Just the wrong person, because the wrong person needs to be illustrated to our main character to allow them to then have their eyes open to, it can't be just anybody. I actually need to consider my own wants and needs and desires. And as basic as that makes him out to be, I feel like that really was just his role.
Yeah, that's a good point. I believe I agree with you. And I almost wonder if he was sort of meant to be not exactly a precursor to Jason, but someone who illustrated to Lorelai the perils of dating within her parents' world.
Mm-hmm.
Because Emily going out on a limb to get Peyton's number for Lorelai and their date not going well and them having zero in common ends up being rough for Emily. And even Richard feels like he has to step in and go golfing with Peyton's dad so that they can smooth things over, so that that Lorelai's, social snafu doesn't screw things up for Emily. She doesn't want to lose her coveted spot at tea, I guess. And I don't love that that's a thing to begin with. Like, it's kind of a BS reason for her to care. She should be more concerned that Lorelai is with someone that she likes and is good for her, instead of like what it means for her. But
also, if I was Lorelai at that point, like, I would be mortified that my parents are still intervening in my love life at that point. Like, I'd probably be honestly mortified at any point in my life, regardless of how old I am. But once I'm in my 30s, if my parents are still calling up potential partners for me, and saying, go out on a date with this guy, he's a good friend of the family, I would shut it down so fast. And I'd also just, again, cringe, and just, there would need to be an immediate boundary set of like, I don't need you to orchestrate my love life. If I want to date, I will date. If I want to go out, I will do so. But and Lorelai tells Emily, not even in this instance, but at times, just to back off and to stop intervening. And I feel like this was just another instance of her needing to do that and just be like, I'm 32 now, Mom. This doesn't fly anymore. Not that it ever did, but you can't be calling up men for me, the sons of your DAR buddies, because, you want me to find a man. Like, I need to do it on my own at this point, in the way that I see best fit for me. And Emily, that was going to be a fun conversation, but I feel like it needed to happen. And so it's just cringe that Emily is still interfering in Lorelai's life in this way.
Yes, all true. And also kind of cringe that Peyton's mom cares so much, like when Lorelai is talking to Richard about it, and he's like, she's an important person in our social circle. She may have taken this the wrong way, and it might impact her relationship with your mother. And Lorelai says, all I did was not go on a second date with her fully grown son. There's no way she should be mad at Mom for that. And she's not wrong. If two, again, grown-ass women can't get along because one grown-ass woman's grown-ass son can't get a second date with the other grown-ass woman's grown-ass daughter, That's just sad. Like, why do we do this to ourselves socially as a species? Yeah. Peyton was so not it for Lorelai. When someone talks more than Lorelai, that's a red flag. I got it.
We got it.
We haven't.
It's always on hand.
Like, it's always sitting here, but like, we really haven't flagged anyone in a while. So it feels good to have you back. But yeah, to his credit, we don't know what Peyton, like what his interactions with his parents were, but like their parents should not be caring so much about how their date went. Like, it's nice to be like, how'd it go? Was it good? Like, do you actually like each other? But the minute they said that they weren't interested in each other, that should have been the end of the discussion, because there's absolutely no need to, like you said, interfere or stick your nose in to a relationship between two grown adults.
Yeah. I also just want to sidestep briefly and say that when your daughter is, not in this case, but just in general, when your daughter is pulling a 16-year-old version of herself and excusing herself and then running up to her bedroom and then climbing out of her balcony window and scaling down some vine and going back down the side of the house to escape a dinner date with someone who's already present in the house that you invited over, also maybe not the right person.
Yeah.
And kudos to Richard for just being like, you can, yeah, she's not here, Emily.
Yeah. Emily, she's not up here. That's like one of Richard's best moments. Let's be real. But yeah, Chase Bradford was another horrible intrusion on Lorelai's love life. Like, I mean, granted, as much as she is a grown woman who gets to make her own choices, can she be trusted to find her own men? I don't know. Sometimes it's questionable, because she has some moments where we're like, ooh, well, that was a bad one. What were you thinking there? But it still doesn't mean that Emily gets to interfere and like try to control things. So there's that.
Yeah, I agree.
I didn't even put Chase on the list. How did I forget about Chase? Maybe it was because it wasn't like someone Lorelai was into and it was just foisted upon her.
Also because I think the whole world would do well to just forget Chase Bradford, because just like, the man makes my skin crawl, and there's no better way for me to put it. Like, I just see him on screen whenever I get around to watching that episode, and I'm just like, like, I'm uncomfortable just as a viewer. And I think, like, if I were ever to be put in the situation that Lorelai was, I would just be like, who is this guy? Like, and I would probably be bolting out of there too, because there was just something about his demeanor, but also about, like, he had like a weird stare. He looked at Lorelai like she was a piece of meat to be devoured, and super uncomfortable. Just, yeah. Thank you. Next.
Yeah, he was super forgettable. And you're right, he was super creepy. That sort of intense gaze that he had was so weird. Kudos to that actor for making a thoroughly unlikable character. But like, skin crawling is an excellent way to put it. Like, ugh, no.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you missed the mark with that one, Emily. All right. Next man. Paul. AKA Darren Wilden from Pretty Little Liars.
Oh, Paul.
Boy with the rebounds already.
Yeah, okay. How do you feel about the age gap?
I don't actually think it's a huge deal. He's clearly into his 20s. I don't even think he's early 20s at that point. And Lorelai's 33. So, he's probably at least 22, 23. So yeah, 10 years sounds like a lot. But also, when we remember exactly where Lorelai's at in life, it doesn't feel like such a huge chasm between their maturity levels and sort of place in life. And, he's old enough to make his own decisions. I think the issue that they had most was just that they didn't have anything in common. And, at the end of the day, he was maybe a little too, like, enthusiastic. I don't think, like, Lorelai has just a little bit too much of a cynical streak running through to get on with someone who is that kind of chipper.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, like, she looks really young. She acts really young. She's young at heart. And it's not like she's, in her 40s or 50s and he's 18. He's clearly, probably also nearing the end of his education. If they're classmates and she's on the cusp of graduating, so is he. So he's got to be at least like minimum. He's got to be 21. He's got to be drinking age. And if he wasn't, she would have come back and been like, so I didn't know that he wasn't drinking age. And then we would have been having a very different conversation. But yeah, I think that their incompatibilities went beyond the age gap. And in this case, it was like, it feels weird, but I don't think there was anything technically wrong with it. I just don't think they were right for each other. They were like super not right for each other.
Yeah. I would agree with all of that. And I also will say that I don't love how Stars Hollow responded with them just openly mocking and commenting on the age difference that they saw when he rolls up to the diner. And even Luke is just like, oh, all right. Again, granted, like on the extreme end of things, if there's ever like, an 80-year-old who's dating a 20-year-old, I'm just going to be like, excuse me, what is happening? But
all right, Anna Nicole.
Yeah, they were only a few years apart. She wasn't, robbing the cradle. So I agree that they were not the right people for each other, but the age didn't really throw me off at all. And I don't even think that Paul was necessarily the most immature person. I just think, again, there was just incompatibility there that was never going to allow that to work. But age, it's not that it didn't have anything to do with it. It was just really like at the bottom of the list in terms of why that was not going to work out.
Yeah. I mean, it might have become a bigger issue had they continued dating. If he was only 22 and she was 33 with a 17-year-old daughter, that might have been a little awkward for him. And I think when you put it in context of like how he's probably really only a couple of years older than Lorelai's daughter, that makes it feel a little worse. But it's nowhere near as bad as Zach hitting on Lorelai. So, like, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but it's not the worst thing. And like I said, they're both consenting adults. So if they chose to continue it, it would have been what it would have been. What I think was almost weirder about it was that, she clearly mentioned Stars Hollow and Luke's Diner. And he had been on one date with this woman. And he was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to this town where she's from, and I'm going to go to that diner she was talking about. And I'm going to bring my parents.
Yeah.
That was weird.
Yeah, that was maybe just of a you don't know better immaturity sort of moment. But again, and
the South Park t-shirt didn't help.
Agreed.
Yeah. Did that come out right? Did I say that right? South Park t-shirt? Or did I just say South t-shirt?
No.
This is what the coffee is for. Okay, good.
You said it right. But yeah, I agree. Again, was not doing him any favors, but I feel like sometimes when our women are in between men, it just allows the writers to take our women from point A to point B and just get to the next one while allowing them to realize, oh boy, he was not right. Let me try and course correct on the next one and actually figure out what I want. And sometimes those men are there just to be that. I mean, I think in Alex's case, like obviously the actor had to move on to other projects, but sometimes they are just contracted for 2 or 3 episodes because you're just meant to allow our character to, and in this case, one of our women to realize something about herself. And that's going to be your purpose on the show.
Yeah. I think he was there to just be a light, fluffy rebound after Max. I think it was kind of her going the opposite way. She almost did a very mature thing in marrying Max. Well, I mean, I use that loosely because we know how immature their relationship was. But I mean, like, marriage is not something to be taken lightly, and it would have been a huge life change for her. So I think she wanted something that wasn't so serious, and that it was almost some sort of subconscious sabotage of herself, where it's like, I'm going to go for someone who's clearly like younger and not in that place and just have some fun with this, because what just happened was too real and I can't deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yep.
Rune.
F off, Rune.
Oh, he's the worst.
Like, I think I'd go celibate if like that was the only type of guy left in the world. I would just be like, no.
The human race doesn't need to continue. It's fine.
I think I'm just gonna live my best life from here on out. I don't even know where to begin with answering the question. Like, what is wrong with you? I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, neither do I, frankly. I don't even know how much like discussion is warranted, because Rune was obviously meant to be like the comic relief of this date, and it was so obviously bad, and it had such a specific purpose. Like, you could debate the merits of the other guys, but Rune was just really never a real thing. He was just sort of an exaggerated caricature that the writers came up with, because they're like, you know what would be funny is if we had Max Perlich just like making fun of Lauren Graham for 40 minutes.
Yeah. And the thing with Rune is that it's not even that he doesn't know how to treat women well. He just doesn't know how to treat people well. He's just a rude asshole at the end of the day. And it's not specific to Lorelai or women. He's even rude to Jackson. And it's like, you are such a jerk and so inconsiderate. How does anyone want to associate with you? Even family members. I don't know how Jackson did it. Because Jackson's probably a saint, like he's a saint, and you know, so he tries. But if Rune was my family member, I don't want to associate with you. Like, you've got to learn how to treat people better and not be so immaturely ignorant. I don't even know. There was just so much wrong there.
Yeah, I would avoid every family gathering if he was my cousin. So,
yeah.
Or at least avoid him at every family gathering, because you're right. He's just so rude and so selfish and bizarre that I don't even like know what to make of him. And of course, it's also gross that he goes to Bo and calls. I think it's him who tells Bo that she's a nymphomaniac, which is just not true.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where that came from. It was so weird, you know. The conversation she has with Bo later on, where he's kind of questioning her about going out with Rune, and he's like, "But don't you have a daughter?" And she's like, "It's all true. I'm an info." Like,
mm-hmm.
It's pretty funny, but you know, not cool, Rune. Like, you shouldn't be gossiping like that. And you know, look in the mirror before you throw stones at the people you're set up on blind dates with.
Yeah, and again, he's even just inconsiderate to his own family members, where he's on this double date and he makes it all about him, when it's not even about just him and Lorelai at that point. You also need to be considerate of Jackson and Suki. And the second the night isn't going the way that he wants it to, he's like, Jackson, this sucks. I just want to go bowling. And he's even saying, like, Jackson, just blow off Suki and come bowling with me. Like, the level of inconsideration is just...
Yeah, we need a lot more red flags for Rune. He's just, he's a walking, talking red flag.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, kudos to Jackson. Like, he had that moment of hesitation where he was just going to be like, okay, I guess we'll go bowling. But he stepped up and he was just like, no, like, I'm on a date. You're on a date. If your date isn't going well and you want to skedaddle, that's on you. But I'm here with Suki and I'm going to see this evening play out and I'm not going bowling with you. And Rune at that point just couldn't even hack it and stormed off like an, insolent little child. And it's just, again, I would, if that was the type of men that it was left in the world, guess that's it, folks. We did our best.
Yeah. And on that note, bye, Loon.
Yep.
I think that wraps us up for Lorelai's men, unless there's anybody else that I missed that you think of.
No, I think we've covered all of our bad boyfriend bases with her.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously we have issues with some of her like major guys as well, but they're getting their own episodes essentially. So we'll get to those. This episode's more for like the background characters who were never really like in serious contention. So let's move on to Rory. And let's go with her sort of like first bad quote unquote boyfriend or wannabe boyfriend. One of my least favorite characters, Tristan DeGray.
Oh, Tristan. And the interesting thing is that he is also a bad boyfriend to Paris. So there's going to be a little bit of talk about him. We've already touched on him in previous episodes on why he was not great. I don't know or think that he was ever interested in Rory for who Rory was. I think it was just that's the new girl in school and she's got a pretty face and I'm Mr. Popular. I don't know if he was just trying to prove that he could get her, and then once he had her, it's like, I'm satisfied by just knowing that I succeeded. I don't know if that was ever going to go anywhere. I just feel like his high school dating scene was just always for show, and he never actually cared about any of the girls that he was dating, making out with, at their lockers. I don't think he actually had a genuine care for anybody other than himself, honestly. And I feel like there was just, we've talked about it, a lot of self-pity, probably a bad home life, lack of love from his family that was coming into the picture that just really didn't do him any favors with how he saw women or dating or, anything in that regard. But at that time that we're seeing him in high school, I don't think he was ever good boyfriend material because he just had a lot on, like he had a lot that he needed to work on for himself before he could ever be emotionally ready or available to any partner.
I agree. Rory just felt like a conquest a little bit. And like he never really made any efforts to get to know her properly. Anytime you would interact with her, he would be a jerk about it and he wouldn't respect her boundaries when it was clear that like she was seeing someone else, and he just decided to be antagonistic to everyone, especially to Rory and Dean once it was clear that Rory wasn't available to him. And again, sometimes I have some sympathy for him because it's clear that he doesn't get enough attention and he probably hasn't had any good relationships modeled for him in his life. He doesn't know how to interact with people in a healthy way because it's never been shown to him. But that doesn't mean we have to condone his behavior, and it doesn't mean we have to ship him with Rory because, I don't want Rory to become like a savior for guys. That's not her job to like make them decent people. So, and I don't like the idea of condoning the whole like, he's only mean to you because he likes you myth, and just being okay with someone going out with their own bully. Like that, it's not okay for people to treat you that way, and caving into that pestering and that incessant attempt to like go out with you is really only just tacitly implying that that's okay, and that's not what we should be teaching our kids. So I'm glad that they didn't cave to the temptation to put Rory with a guy like Tristan. And I'm glad that his like Chad Michael Murray's career worked out for him, where he got to go to Dawson's Creek and then One Tree Hill, because I think he couldn't have left the show any later. Like, he didn't leave soon enough for my liking. So I'm glad we were well shot of him before, winter even hit in season 2. So I say good riddance. I feel really bad for Paris and what he did to her. She seemed to have this idea that he was like, there was more to him and that he actually had a good side to him, that he has a hard life, and she can relate to him on that. But he treated her like garbage too. So I can't give him too many points.
Yeah. We may briefly talk about some of Paris's bad boyfriends, but I did want to just inject that quickly here, because he did go on a date with Paris. And so that wasn't a completely non-existent thing for either one of them. And my heart does break for Paris, because I feel like you're right. I think she did see something in Tristan that maybe he wasn't even recognizing in himself. I feel like she was seeing some good in him that I think is actually there, but can't come to the forefront because his own arrogance stands in the way of it. And I feel like had he just been in a better place in his own life, he might have been able to open up to Paris a little bit more, and then maybe that would have been a good fit. And that would have been a relationship that lasted. But again, Tristan was just not in the right headspace, nor was he mature enough or emotionally available enough to be ready for anyone at that point. So it was also just never going to work for those reasons. And that's sad, because it devastated Paris, and she deserved better.
She really did. We will get back to her in a little bit. Well, let's continue with Rory. And another one who only had one appearance. Trevor. What did you think of Trevor?
Bye, Felicia. You can GTFO. Go on.
I didn't actually have a problem with him. He seemed like a perfectly nice, normal guy, except maybe wanting to sit on the same side of the table. Like, that's a little weird. I much prefer to sit across from people, especially like on a first date when I'm trying to like talk to them. Unless I'm sitting at a bar or something and it's like literally impossible to look at them. But I thought it was good that Rory went on at least a casual date, that she kind of opened her mind, because that whole conversation she had with Lorelai before ultimately agreeing to go on this date with Trevor, like, I'm glad Lorelai prodded her, being like, what's so wrong with this guy? And she's like, he drinks out of a water bottle and he's preppy, and I don't like preppy. Like, how are you ever going to meet anyone if you're like so damn picky that you're not going to go out with anyone who uses a water bottle? Like, yeah. So no environmentalists for you, Rory? I don't know. It was just weird that like that was her thing. But it's good for her to experiment in her college years, because Lorelai was totally right. She had really only been in relationships to that point. And dating is a skill, and you have to learn about it and practice it just like anything else. And so I'm glad that she was given the opportunity to go on a date. And I don't think Trevor did anything wrong. He seemed like a perfectly normal dude, but it was Rory. And like, she even recognizes herself when she calls Lorelai. She's like, he's fine. I'm crazy. Like, I bring the conversation to a screeching halt. Like, she can hardly have a conversation with this guy, and he's being normal. Like, I don't understand why she's having so much trouble. with this concept. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know sometimes if it's just you needed something to write that week because you were short on materials, so you just throw someone into the picture to have plot points. And I agree that on the whole, Trevor was not the worst human being. But you just watch it, and I feel like sometimes even from a viewer perspective, you're just like, why is this show wasting this time on this plot point when this is not going to go anywhere? Can't you give me something better? Sometimes I feel like that's how I view his insertion into the show, where it's like, he's obviously not going to end up with Rory, so why are we wasting time on this arc?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. But I think the purpose was what I just said. It was expanding Rory's dating horizons. Now that she's at college, she has to sort of go beyond the guys in her small town, and she has to learn how to actually communicate with people, especially men, considering she's a heterosexual woman. So it was good practice for her. And, you know, it even helped her buck up to ask out William at the end of the episode. And his rejection stung a little bit. And I don't know where it's going to fit in, but sometime I feel like we have to talk about what happens in the Clamor and the Clangor when she thinks that the story is about her. I'm like, oh man, you're just so self-centered sometimes. But okay, so we'll get there eventually. But yeah, I mean, I didn't have any problems with Trevor. Obviously, he wasn't built to last. And that's okay. Not everybody has to. And I found it interesting that he was being sort of contrasted with Marty. Like, Lorelai was like, so what about Naked Guy? Like, is Naked Guy hot? We'll get to him in a second, too. I want to talk about one more before we get to Marty, because he's a little, like, meatier to dig into, and I want to, like, get another kind of one-off out of the way before we do that.
Okay.
Graham. Another Emily setup. What do we think of Graham?
Just the worst. And I will say it louder in case the mic didn't pick that up. Just the worst. I mean, an Emily setup is telling right off the bat, because she's once again intruding when she should not be. I feel like Rory handles it a bit better than Lorelai does in terms of the setup. But again, when you're watching this, I feel like in these instances, it's just so clear cut right off the bat, like, this isn't right. It's never going to last. And especially with his behavior and what we see from him, I want to just throw a book at his head and just be like, please just go away. Like, what are, I don't understand sometimes how people can't even see how problematic their own behavior is. And I feel like he was absolutely one of those individuals.
I don't think he was that bad. Like, we have to put this in context. This dude is like 19. He's just finished his first round of end of year exams at Yale. He's celebrating. And Rory calls it a date. But, like, this was very clearly not a date. This was a bunch of people who had plans to go out to a bar and to, like, have food and drinks. And she was just invited to come along. She was not owed his undivided attention. And, you know, if he actually wanted to be more serious about her, he would have put more attention into her. But, like, it was more just like, our parents and grandparents set this up. I'll, you know, go along with this because we told them we would. But, like, Rory shouldn't have expected much of anything out of that, because it was clear that there were like 10 people going to this thing. He was going out with his bros. Of course, they were going to be drinking beer and talking about sports. I don't know what you expected out of this, Rory, but, like, welcome to college, okay? Like, and she just sat there alone. She didn't try to participate in the conversation. Granted, she doesn't really know much about sports, and it's not her thing, but she, like, didn't even try, and she was just really sullen about it the whole time. So I don't think she's entirely just, like, off the hook on this one herself either. It's just clear that she and Graham didn't have anything in common, and he could have been better to her, but also, like, it's not like he asked her out specifically, being like, will you go out with me? And then he brought 8 of his besties and ignored her the whole time. It was very,
That's
like,
fair.
clearly meant to be a group thing the whole time, and she just was like, oh, they're drinking and smoking? How dare they? As if that's
Mhm.
not what college kids do. She's just very, like, kind of holier than thou about the, like, I don't really drink. Like, that was just a roommate thing.
Rory and holier than thou are synonymous?
Never. I know. Complete revelation. We had no idea. This is
No
just occurring
clue.
to us. Yeah. So again, he's just a college kid doing what college kids do. I don't want to hold it against him. He's probably a nice guy. But like, I was actually rewatching this episode earlier because I just wanted to like revisit. And I had this thought. He kind of reminds me of if like Dean and Logan had a baby. Even in his looks. Like he kind of has
Yes.
a bit of Jared Padalecki about him, but he's very like clean cut in the same way that Matt Zuckery is.
Mm-hmm.
It was so weird. It just like occurred to me. I was like, oh, that's like weird foreshadowing for what's about to come.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
that was funny.
tracks though. I think there is. I couldn't reference it or, call any sort of evidentiary support to mind off the top of my head, but I think there is something where it is like, physical attraction and looks like, you are drawn to the same sort of person in that way a lot of the time. So it makes sense to me that she could have had even the most, like, it didn't go anywhere, but even like a basic or a general interest in him because that was her vibe, so to say, and that's the kind of person that she was going to be attracted to from a looks perspective. So
Yeah, that's very true. So yeah, another one bites the dust with Graham, but in a way he's kind of like Logan, and Rory ends up quite liking Logan and fitting in with the Life and Death Brigade. So like, I don't know why she was so damn judgy about these particular guys. Granted, they were being stupid with the drunk driving thing. I will give her that. And like, you don't have to vibe with everyone or like everyone, but she just seemed like she was being really petulant about it at the time. Just her attitude was very like, I'm a good girl. I'm not going to participate in this.
yeah.
Don't get in the car. You don't have to do that. Grab a taxi and meet them there or whatever. But like, you don't have to be so standoffish about it. But
yeah, for sure.
All right, one more Yaley. Let's get to Marty. How do we feel about Marty? Like, what? I have my feelings. What about you?
Marty deserved better. He was not perfect or flawless or without, like, he made his own mistakes, but Rory did not treat him well. It's obvious that she was not interested in him or saw anything with him going beyond a friendship, and that's fine, but she kind of led him along or, made it seem like there was potential for that. I mean, when you're so very clearly interested in Logan, but you're still inviting Marty over for like a movie marathon afternoon, and I'll arrange the snacks and I'll arrange the movies and come spend an afternoon and an evening with me. Friends can do that, but with Marty's interests already being underlying and existing, like, it's so hard. Like, there's that gray area where it's like, is she asking me on a date? Is she just asking me to hang out as friends? I don't know. I have feelings for her. I don't know if she has feelings for me. I think she doesn't. But he was put in such a tough spot there with being like, he wanted to say no when he was trying to say no to her with that invitation, but she just kept on saying like, no, it's going to be fun. Please come. And then he eventually gave in and said like, okay. And look how the end of that entire evening turned out. He was put in a situation where he couldn't afford the dinner out that all of them ended up having, which was embarrassing and something that he felt ashamed of. And then it even goes further with him having to then contend with, you know, like him just needing to put his feelings out there and be like, I like you, Rory. And her just being like, I like Logan. Like, after everything that you've put this man through today and all of the shame and the embarrassment that he's had to feel, way to just like stomp on his heart and just like send him packing in the worst way. And I really don't like Rory for doing any of that because I feel like just he deserves so much better as a person in general than the treatment that he got that day. I'll start there and say, what do you think?
Fair enough. I'm of two minds about Marty because there are moments when I'm like, yeah, there's like some almost telegraphing here from the writers being like, this could be a real thing because he sort of is the best of both worlds where he's down to earth and from sort of like a middle class background. He is at Yale on scholarship and has to work a lot to earn his own money and pay for his own way. He's not a trust fund kid like a lot of the people at Yale. He's smart enough to get into Yale. So in a lot of ways, he has a lot in common with Rory. And so that could make them a good pair. And even Richard and Emily seem to like him and seem to approve of him in Ted Koppel's Big Night Out. Like just the look on Richard's face where he's like, I like that boy. And they have that moment of bonding about the one night in a hallway does not a naked man make. So, or naked guy make.
Mm-hmm.
So it could have been a thing. But part of the reason that I never really liked Marty for Rory is that he was such a good guy for her to have in her life. And I'm like, I really wish they had just leaned hard into the platonic friend thing instead of making it like, oh, look, another guy is pining after Rory. Great. She's just irresistible. You know, she's some sort of mythological creature, just like her mom. Guys can't resist her. I really wish there had been someone who wasn't under her spell and who was just a good friend to her, someone who was a masculine influence, who had, you know, a different perspective, who might have been able to help her out in her relationships with other guys and other people in general, who was just there as a really solid friend instead of someone that she kind of had to tiptoe around because of his fragile male ego. I think she needed a good male friend in her life because she hasn't really had that, except maybe like in a weird way, Luke.
Yeah.
And that's not really the same thing. I think she needed that. She needed more friends in general because she really only had like Lane and Paris, and everybody else was just acquaintances who weren't really friends in the way that she needed them. And Marty could have been that for her. And they didn't have to make it this weird rivalry between him and Logan, and they didn't have to make Rory into a jerk. Like, you know, this is kind of more about the guys than the gals. But you're right. I don't like the way Rory handled that. She could have been a lot more tactful about it. And obviously we see this come back in season 7 when Marty is dating Lucy. And by that point, he's a real jerk. Like, it's been 2 years since she turned him down, and Rory is still with Logan. She made her choice. She was clear with him. I don't think she really led him on. I think she really was just like, she liked him as a friend, and she wanted to maintain that friendship. And that requires actually spending time with each other. But he was trying to duck her because he was like trying to deal with his own feelings about her in kind of an immature way, I guess, by avoiding the situation. And so she could have been more delicate in her handling of it, but they hadn't seen each other or spoken in like 2 years after that. And all of a sudden they show back up in each other's lives, and he lies to his girlfriend. I think that's the other reason he really deserves to be on this list and be called a bad boyfriend, is because of what he did to Lucy. So I don't like where they went with it. It was unnecessary. I think he could have had a really interesting role as the platonic male friend.
I agree with that. And I've thought about it a little bit, but I'm thinking about it more now that you've said it. There are absolutely friendships that can exist and flourish across the gender spectrum. It doesn't always have to be, girls being best friends with other girls, guys being best friends with other guys, like those friendships can exist across the board. And I think they should, and it's healthy, and it's good to have those friendships in that way. I would have loved to have seen, again, just echoing what you said, Marty as a friend, and just having like that male influence that Rory can go to at times, to say like, do you think this guy is treating me right? Like, what would you do? And Marty could weigh in from the male perspective and say like, yeah, I think that's okay, or no, like, you deserve better from this person. I would have loved to see them have that ongoing friendship. And I think you're right. Like, I would have loved it. And I hate that the writers, well, I don't know if it's, I mean, it is a writing decision, but yeah, like, it doesn't always have to be like they're pining over our women and it's a relationship or bust. Like, why not just allow them to have strong male friendships? I wish we would have gotten more of that.
Yeah, even with Luke and Lorelai, that happened, like they had to go and turn that into a friends to lovers. And I'm kind of glad they didn't go that way with Rory and Marty, but I really wish they had actually just stuck to friends. That would have been perfect. And the other thing I don't like about Marty is the first time she sees him again after she finds him in the hallway initially and they sort of like meet. She's late for breakfast. She rolls up in her bunny slippers and he uses that moment to approach her again because of his own fragile ego, where he's like, yeah, I've been too afraid to approach you, but now you look like this. And then he introduces her to his Breakfast Club guys and kind of, puts her in the limelight when she's like just woken up and hasn't even had breakfast or coffee yet. And he's like trying to level the playing field in terms of like, well, you saw me doing something embarrassing. Now I have to see you doing something embarrassing. And like, this is almost as bad as being naked and drunk in the hallway and passed out. No, it's not. Absolutely, it's not. I have bunny slippers. I will not take that blasphemy from you, Marty. Don't you come for my bunny slippers. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a low blow. It was unnecessary. It kind of speaks to his character of like, he doesn't have the confidence to, exist in a world with someone like Rory who is very confident in herself. And so she was magnanimous about it and was like, fine, consider the playing field leveled. And she was good about it, but kind of a jerk move.
Yeah, not the first time though, not the last time. And it's also just, I think that's one of the reasons why these relationships break down sometimes in the way that they do, because you're just not being nice to the other person. And maybe if you had just put forth like a modicum of consideration and care, then maybe it would have gone somewhere. But when you're so dismissive for whatever reason that you're, acting that way, it's going to fall apart. And I feel like that's why it did a lot of the time.
Yeah. All right, we got one more for Rory. Okay. Want to take a stab? Who's left?
Logan.
Just kidding. Hey, you get out of here with that.
Hey.
Now let's talk about Paul. Another Paul. They both date a Paul. Thanks, I hate it.
Yeah. I don't know why. Just why? I mean, I guess that's my first question. Just why? When you have this arc developing in the revival that you know what the final 4 words are going to be, and you know who the father of this child is going to be. Spoiler, but not really. We both think it's Logan's. Why bring in Paul at all? Like, I feel like he was just so unnecessary in the revival. I don't know what they were trying to achieve, just other than to make Rory just look like an even bigger asshole than we already thought her out to be. You wake up in the morning and you go to the diner with your mother and you just completely forget that your boyfriend even exists or is in your house. Like, the amount of times that she forgets to call, that she just doesn't factor him in, and then when she does remember, she's just like, yeah, like whatever, I'll get back to him later.
I should really break up with him eventually.
Yeah, like I guess I'll get around to it. And then it ends with eventually him having to text her and be like, so yeah, this isn't working and I think we should just go our separate ways. And even then she's just like, it's about time. What?
Yeah. I don't love that a human being was used as a punchline in the revival. He was way too nice and way too good for her. And yeah, you're right. I think his whole purpose in the revival, like, as if it wasn't bad enough that Rory was helping Logan cheat on his fiance, and as if it wasn't enough with her personal stuff going on, to have that whole subplot in the background. And then obviously she cheats on him again with the Wookiee. She's just a mess and going behind people's backs left, right, and center in the revival. And I think it would have been just as impactful without him. You know, her first one night stand with the Wookiee still would have been a joke in poor taste, frankly. And the whole Logan thing still would have hit. Like, Paul was unnecessary and they just made a joke out of him, which is unfortunate because he seems like he's a loyal, devoted boyfriend who is caring and thoughtful and just very considerate and generous. Look at, like, he brought stuff to show Luke that they could bond over, and he offers to put software on Lorelai's laptop. He's just a regular nice guy again. And yet here we are with Rory in all these toxic scenarios with people that are just totally unnecessary.
Yeah, I agree. Paul deserved better.
Mm-hmm. Justice for Paul.
Yeah, he didn't do anything wrong. And that's what is the most devastating part of it, where, you know, Logan, Jess, Dean, Chris, Luke, Jason, all of the men that have been present in our Gilmore Girls lives have always misstepped in some way. I think Paul and Rory's Paul, Rory's Paul might be one of the few individuals that it's just like, he never did. He was just a nice guy who just deserved better, but got crapped on. And I don't love it. I wish we had just, why even make him exist? The revival and that screen time could have been spent focusing on other people and other characters that we would have liked to see brought back more, given more screen time. I don't understand it. I don't love it from that perspective. But again, just there was a man who deserved better, and it was just callous on Rory's part to be as blasé about it as she was.
Yeah, very well said. I think that wraps up Rory. We've already been going for a while, so I want to speed round Lane's guys real quick.
Okay. Lightning round.
Let's start. Give me a few quick thoughts, a few sentences on Todd.
Okay, dude. Not right for Lane. Again, good for somebody else. Needed to see more to understand what good qualities he can bring to the forefront, but someone that I would consider, again, not for Lane, but seemingly a nice guy all around from what we saw.
Yeah, I mean, he's portrayed as being kind of clueless, but at least he wasn't, like, rude necessarily. It could have been worse. Yeah, just, again, someone to demonstrate that Lane really has no idea what she's doing because she's kind of being stunted by her mother's restrictions. So, like, the fact that she refers to him as her soulmate, she needs to get over that sort of intensity real quick. But yeah, she's a teenager. We were all kind of like that. So sometimes I just have to give these kids a pass.
Yep.
All right. Henry.
I liked Henry. Sweet guy, made the effort, really genuinely wanted to get to know Lane better, and even worked around all of the loopholes and the runarounds that Lane had to put into place based on Mrs. Kim's just antics in terms of like, you know, dating of men and boys or whatever. I don't fault him for throwing in the towel when he did, because he did try to make it work, and it was just too complicated at that point, and I get it. So I don't fault him for that. I feel like they would have been a good pair had Mrs. Kim, I was about to say Mrs. Lane again. Won't make that mistake. Had Mrs. Kim not been as strict as she was. So yeah, I like Henry, and I would have liked to see that play out a little bit more, but it was never going to, because Mrs. Kim.
I think Mrs. Kim would have actually liked Henry a lot. You know, he was Korean. He was going to be a doctor. He was respectful. He volunteered at his church. She was everything he wanted for Lane. Or he was everything she wanted for Lane. And Lane actually liked him, but that freaked her out. She's like, "Oh my God, I like someone my parents would actually approve of, and it horrifies me." If she had just sort of leaned into that and recognized that her parents' approval means something to her, and not let that get in the way, let it be such a hang up for her, they might have had more of a chance, because I don't think her parents would have disapproved of this. And you're right, he was great for jumping through all those hoops to be able to talk to her and see her and hang out with her. And I also don't fault him for throwing in the towel, but I think maybe it was just a little abrupt the way he ended it, kind of over the phone, and was like, "I'm already taking someone else to prom." That kind of hurt, and I get it, but I think an interesting thing about him too is that he sort of leads the way for Dave, because when we see Dave come in season 3, like, he is right there with Lane on the subterfuge. Like, he's just as good at it as she is, and he's coming up with his own plans to get around Mrs. Kim. And I think that was one of those clear signs of their compatibility. Like, Henry just kind of went along with it, but he really had to be led by Lane. Mm-hmm. Whereas Dave was like, "Let's do this. Let's hide the guys. Let's hide the band. Let's pretend to be a Christian musician." Like, he was so good to her. So
yeah.
But I still would have preferred, like, seeing Henry come back and be a thing rather than her getting with Zach. And like, Zach is on my list of bad boyfriends, but I don't want to dive into him too much, simply because we will talk about him more later. So just keep in mind that we don't like Zach for Lane, and we're not the only ones.
Yeah.
All right, last one for Lane. Young Chu.
Again, nice guy. A bit too naive and innocent for his own well-being. I feel like if Mrs. Kim had the daughter in Lane that she wanted to have, Young Chu would be a good fit. But Lane was even, I feel like, a bit too rebellious and independent for someone like Young Chu. Where he needed someone who was just more down to earth, more not rock and roll-ish, or just, you know, as out there and as artistic as Lane was. And I'm not faulting Lane for that at all. Like, you go, girl, you do you. I just don't think she was going to be a good fit for him, because I feel like he just needed someone who was a little more
traditional,
docile, I was going to say. And I hate using that word too, because I feel like that's just like, ugh, like, you know, diminishing on the woman, maybe a little bit too much. But I just feel like he just needed someone who was just a little more laid back and not as energetic and as outgoing as Lane was personality-wise.
That's a good point. I kind of agree. The terminology I would use would be, I think he wants someone more traditional and more, docile doesn't feel like the right word. I think he just wants someone who is, laid back is a pretty good way to put it. You know, he seems pretty traditional, other than the fact that he has a Japanese girlfriend there for a bit. That kind of goes against the grain of what the family wants. But he's just, you know, very sweet, very, very calm. And yeah, that's not Lane at all. She's a lot more rebellious. And so he needs someone who's kind of going to maybe toe the line a little more when it comes to doing what you're supposed to do, because he's going to go to Adventist school and build Adventist hospitals just like his dad. And Lane doesn't want to follow that kind of path. So you're right. They're incompatible in that way. And the other thing for me is that Young Chu is around when Dave is around. And obviously Dave is meant to be like the OTP for Lane, and the exterior universe just screwed that up for us as an audience. And I mean, granted, the OC was, I guess, a solid show. It was a little more dramatic, very different vibes than this, and it was good for Adam Brody.
Mm-hmm.
But I really wish we had got Dave. I would almost have preferred seeing them actually recast Dave rather than putting her with Zach. It would have been weird, but maybe less weird than Zach.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Anyway, this is not really a speed round anymore. Last but not least, let's move on to Paris's guys. I've got two I want to talk about. Let's start with Asher. And another age gap. How do we feel about this one?
Nope. Just a huge X across the board. It's a no from me, dog. This was not Asher's first foray into dating younger women. He seems to have a proclivity toward it, which just makes me want to gag a little bit. They definitely they could meet each other on an intellectual level, and that's good, but like still just, it doesn't mean that the age difference is acceptable or healthy in any way, and I don't think that it was. I feel like this relationship was also possibly stemming from Paris just having a lack of a father figure present in the home and having some serious daddy issues coming to the forefront now, which again is just gag me. That's not how you resolve that, by getting into a relationship with a very older man. So just like, no, doesn't sit right with me. Thank you. Next. Again.
100% agree. The power imbalance was so weird. The age gap was too large. He was way too experienced. She was inexperienced, young, naive. Just because she's technically 18 and an adult doesn't mean that she's matured enough yet, either emotionally or intellectually, to handle a relationship like that. So yeah, I mean, it was really just a fantasy for her, and it got really gross. And not only that, but it turned her into a jerk, because look at how she treated Jamie when she started things up with Asher. So huge 100% red flags, pure premium grade red flags. No. Okay. And last but not least for this episode, I don't think he was a bad boyfriend, but I put him on this list because you have made comments in the past that you didn't like, or you didn't see them ending up together. And I was really curious about it because I thought he was such a good match for Paris. But I want you to explain to me, seriously, why you don't like Paris and Doyle.
We could be here for another hour.
Make it succinct.
with me giving you that explanation. A succinct one. Paris wore the pants in that relationship, and Doyle was way too intimidated by it, more than he should have been. Paris was just too headstrong for him, and she's not wrong to be that way because that's just who she is. That's her personality. But she needs to be with somebody who is going to meet her on that level and be okay with that, and not have that level of intimidation that I feel like we saw from Doyle, where he appreciated it. And I think, like, to an extent, like, he was also just turned on by it. And it's like, okay.
Weird kink, but all right.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I feel like how strong of a person she was just wore him down as their relationship and as their marriage progressed, where for as much as he might have loved it at the beginning, it just, again, wore him down over time, and he couldn't stay on the same level that she was at, where she continued to just be this like go-getter and just, I'm gonna make the world mine. And he was just, again, I feel like a little too intimidated by it and not as strong of a person as she was. And then we get to the instance like that we see in the revival where it gets to the point where Paris is just like, he's a screenwriter now, Rory. He's working in Hollywood. And she's like crapping on his profession and just insinuating that like what he's doing from a career path and that standpoint is not enough anymore. And it's not what, like, it's almost something that she's ashamed of from her husband. And it's like, that's, you're just, all of these things are telling me that this relationship and this marriage is not healthy anymore, because you're even just dismissive of what the other person is doing. And when you can't even find like the means to support your spouse at that point, and you're just dumping on them in that way, like, you really need to question what you're doing at that point. Again, that is a very succinct, basic, short answer. I could outline an hour-long response for you, but that's not what we have time for now. But yeah, I don't think they were right for each other long term.
I mean, in one way, I do agree with you that he's not as headstrong as Paris is. I don't know if anyone is, and I wonder if she ended up with someone who was just as headstrong and determined as she was, whether the world would explode from like the energy of that, right? Like altogether, you know? I don't know that that would have been a healthy relationship either, because it would have been just like constantly butting heads and like trying to one up each other. I mean, I think what you're alluding to is that she was so strong and driven that anytime that he didn't live up to her expectations for him, she started to lose respect for him. And you're right, that's not healthy. But I almost think that's more on Paris than on Doyle. Like, if she loves him, she needs to support what's going to make him happy. And she shouldn't be so damn judgmental about a profession that supports their family. They have children. I think she's just being judgmental, and they're throwing this into the revival to try to be funny or edgy or something, and it just doesn't land for me, because I think that, you know, you could see that there was real care there, and Doyle was, you're right, like he respected that in her. He admired her a lot, and you know, in her own way, she admired him for a long time, and he was just so supportive, and she loved that about him. Like when she tried to break up with him and he just showed back up and he's like, I don't want to break up. Like, I'm going to go wherever you go. I thought that was really nice, and they seem to make it work for a long time. And granted, people can grow apart, but I think they did that, again, just to, you know, throw a wrench into things for Paris and to make her look like a jerk. And so I don't like the way they took it. We'll dig into that more some other time. But I think that pretty much wraps us up on bad boyfriends for the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a good stopping point. Again, there are other men that we'll get to in terms of Lane's guys, Paris's guys. When we do character studies for those women, we'll touch on more of that then. But I do think that this is a good stopping point for us. What have we got coming up next, though?
More boyfriends! Next time, we're talking about sort of how the big four react to each other's partners. So, you know, for example, like how Lorelai, Emily, and Richard all reacted to Dean.
Mm-hmm.
And how, you know, Emily and Richard and Rory reacted to Luke. Just sort of juxtaposing the reactions from different characters based on their perceptions and their places in life. And especially, like, I'm very interested in the way that Emily and Richard react to the girls, guys, because their reactions say a lot about their beliefs and their values and all of that. And I really want to kind of tease some of that out a little bit more, because there's some really interesting, like, classist bullshit in there that's going to be fun to talk about. So,
Indeed.
More boyfriends.
Come check that out. In the meantime, if you need more GG content, go back and watch some of our old episodes. We just had some wonderful ones put out. We just sat down with Larissa from Eating Gilmore to talk about food with her. We also just in the past few weeks did an episode with Jenny, the organizer and creator of FanFest. If you don't know about her or don't know about that convention that is happening this fall, go back and check out that episode. And please consider watching that and then buying a ticket to that event. It's going to be a really awesome, just Gilmore Girls based weekend in Algonquin, Maine this fall. So go back and watch that video. And if you do want to get tickets to that, we've included a link where you can find more information to that in the description below. And please just remember to do all of those YouTube things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel. It's one click and it really does help us out so much. And we're always so grateful for the support. That being said, enjoy your weekend and we will see you next Friday night for dinner.
Bye.
Bye.